The policeman sat there after the interview. He looked at me. He said to me, he goes, "I believe you." I was so embarrassed to tell a man what was going down. Anyway, he looked at me, he said, "I believe you." You go to church for good things, to have a good time, to be comforted. You've been called the N-word and this, you've been spat at school. When you go to church, hey, this is where you go for resolution, for comfort, for the oil of healing, as it were, and the church. But you find the church, the higher church, the people in charge of the church, they are sometimes colluding together to protect the fair name of the church rather than practicing what they preach.
Hurt and pain, more than half a century old.
But what I didn't realize then, that when something like that happens to you, you never, ever forget.
Betrayed as children, failed still as men.
Just hold your hands up and say, we knew what was going on. You know, Andrew, we're so sorry, you know, that we didn't believe you.
Michael Smith arrived in West London with his family in 1964. He was 11 years old. A strange country, a hostile new home. He says with other immigrant families from the Caribbean, they gravitated towards the church.
It was the time of the mods and the rockers and the teddy boys and the chains and the motorbikes. Westerns at the time really went out on their own for fear of being attacked by one of the gangs. So the church was seen as a safe place for Afro-Caribbeans at the time. And it was definitely a safe place for me.
While the Seventh Day Adventist Church in Chiswick offered the children fun and friendship, for parents it was something much more serious. Hope and aspiration. Donald Kelly, the embodiment of it all.
There weren't very many black role models at the time for parents to point you towards, but for Donald Kelly as a doctor, as a physician at Oxford, if you could be like him, that was good.
Donald Kelly knew the power his standing in the church gave him. We've spoken to multiple men who say he used it to abuse them when they were boys. He'd studied at Oxford. He was an accomplished preacher and musician. Parents endlessly invited him into their homes and handed their children into his care without a second thought.
Looking back, he knew how to groom people. And so during one summer holiday, he came to my mother's house and asked me to accompany him to Oxford to show around the university. And my mother thought, yeah, great. He took me around the university, showed me the operating theatres during the day, and then in the evening, he booked us into a bed and breakfast.
As Michael slept, he says Donald Kelly got into bed beside him and began to abuse him. Just 15, it would be years before Michael would name it as that. Still now in his 70s, so difficult to talk about.
In the middle of the night, I felt strange. I thought I was dreaming. Somebody's hands was on my trousers, my pajama trousers, and I thought. But in the morning, I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything. So I was ashamed. I didn't tell anybody else in my family. Didn't tell my dad. Didn't tell my mother. Up to this day, I haven't told my mother.
Donald Kelly abused Michael in the late 60s. What Michael didn't know then was that he'd abused boys before and would go on to abuse others. Andrew Cadogan was abused almost a decade later, but the tactics exactly the same.
One day he came to my parents and he said, I'm going to Oxford if Andrew would like to come along. I'm thinking, great, when I go back to school, I could tell my friends, oh, you know, I did during the summer. I went to Oxford University.
But the trip, which 14-year-old Andrew had hoped he would be able to boast about to friends, became something which would shame him for years. In their shared room at the B&B on the very first night, Donald Kelly got into bed beside him.
The lights went off like that, and the man just jumped on me. I was like, what the hell's... So I curled up in the fetus position, and it was like basically he got onto me as though I was his possession. You belong to me. That's how it felt. Grabbing, this is mine, this is mine.
In the morning, Andrew says Kelly acted as if nothing had happened, suggesting they go out, that they go to pray. In a strange city, reliant on his abuser to get him home, Andrew says he was trapped. For the remaining nights of the trip, Kelly did exactly the same again.
My mum, she came home from work, she looked at me, she went, "Oh, how was your trip?" The first thing I said to her was, "Mum, if this man," I couldn't even mention his name, "if this man came to take Paul, Jeffrey or Peter anywhere, they're my younger brothers," I said, do not allow him, do not allow him." I took my towel out there and went to a shower, had a shower, because I'm thinking, oh man, I need to wash all this man's hands off me, because it still felt as though his hands were still on me.
Fear was to stalk the boys in the shape of Kelly himself, turning up at their houses constantly or coming to find them when they were out.
One of my friends said to me, "Andrew, that man's looking at you." I went, "Which man?" He goes, "That man over there." So as I looked, he was standing there looking at me playing football with a big smirk on his face.
Michael says some of the boys were called to a meeting by a prominent member of the church and close ally of Kelly, who warned them to stay silent.
So at the end of the meeting, when everybody spoke, and then that's when he said, "Look, if I hear any of you saying this, you'll have me to deal with."
From the 70s onwards, Donald Kelly travelled extensively, Papua New Guinea, Jamaica, Africa, often working for Adventist-run institutions or on medical missions.
And remember, drink a lot of water. Drink a lot of water for everything.
By 2009, after continuing to hear accounts of Kelly's abuse, Michael spoke to the Metropolitan Police. The police report showing he'd explicitly told them Kelly was still a danger to children. Although no further action was taken in his case, the Met confirmed to us they did contact the Seventh Day Adventist Church about his allegations. We've seen evidence the church was told about Kelly's abuse on a number of occasions dating back decades. In 1994, when Kelly was removed from his post at an Adventist university in Mexico after complaints from students. By the Met after Michael's complaint in 2009. In 2020, one of the most senior pastors in the UK was informed in writing Donald Kelly was a predatory paedophile. Then 2 years later, ministers from the government in Sierra Leone, where Kelly was still working, raised concerns with the church replying they were unaware of allegations against Donald Kelly. Andrew says a severe stroke, while leaving him physically disabled, finally freed him to speak out. Even friends had accused him of lying as a child. He went to the police in February 2022.
The policeman sat there after the interview. He looked at me. He said to me, goes, "I believe you." I was so embarrassed to tell a man what was going down. Anyway, he looked at me, he said, "I believe you."
What was it like when he said, "I believe you"?
Like a weight off my chest, you know what I mean? I actually looked at him, I said, "No, thank you, it was great that another man could say, "I believe you."
But being believed didn't mean getting justice. Donald Kelly was interviewed voluntarily by police, who told Andrew there wasn't enough evidence to take any further action.
And your thoughts results in feelings.
In that same year, a group of victims, including Michael Smith, began pressing the church to finally act against Kelly, raising a formal complaint. But soon after, Donald Kelly died of cancer, buried as he lived, lauded by the church. It wasn't until February 2023 that the church agreed to commission an independent investigation. But 18 months on, despite repeated requests to the church's leadership, not one of the victims has yet been allowed to see what it has found. In a statement today released through lawyers, The trustees of the South England Conference of Seventh Day Adventists said they had only learned about allegations against Donald Kelly in 2021. They said the SEC recognises the appalling and lasting harm that Donald Kelly caused and extends its deepest and heartfelt sympathy to all who've been affected by his abusive conduct. We are appalled that this one man's actions have caused so much suffering to so many people, adding that it takes safeguarding reports extremely seriously and it is reflecting carefully on the lessons to be learned. The church also told us that its trustees are carefully considering the report from independent investigators and would be contacting victims, sharing the findings with them as soon as legally possible, but gave no sense of when that might be.
Donald Kelly hurt you in the most terrible way, but the church has also hurt you, you would say, in terms of how they've dealt with this.
You go to church for good things, to have a good time, to be comforted. You've been called the N-word and this, da, 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 da. You've been spat at school. When you go to church, hey, this is where you go for resolution, for comfort, for the oil of healing, as it were, and the church. But you find the church, the higher church, the people in charge of the church, they are sometimes colluding together to protect the fair name of the church rather than practicing what they preach.
You're in no doubt that had the church acted sooner, you would never have been abused.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm angry with them. I mean, I haven't even read the report about me. I need the report. The church are holding on to it. Where's my justice? You know what I mean? I don't get it. I really don't get it, you know. Where's my justice?
But there will be no justice against an abuser now gone. The truth is what the men asked for. An acknowledgement they weren't lying, that their church let them down. And a promise it will never make the same mistakes again.
Dear brethren, friends, loved ones, on Tuesday evening, the 29th of October, 2024, most of us looked at a very disturbing report on Channel 4 News. This report was filled with disturbing details of a now deceased former member of our church, Don Kelly, who in the 1960s and 70s sexually molested teenage boys who attended one of our churches, as was named in the report. These acts, as described by the two interviewees and echoed here, were despicable, repulsive, heinous, and acts of sadistic, diabolical nature. No person, I repeat, no person should be subjected to this, and we are deeply sorry for what you have gone through, you, the victims. This person breached the trust of parents, every moral and ethical code in society, and Christ-like character. To the victims, we are sorry for the hurt and pain. The trauma suffered by you at the hands of this perpetrator clearly has left scars, and we give you our sincerest empathy. Abuse of any kind should not be condoned in any way, shape, or form. As a church, we are doing our best to ensure that this is eradicated from our congregations through constant education, vigilance, and by motivating all to adhere to our very strong safeguarding policy. We at the SEC believe that we can do this together. One individual going unreported can cause immense suffering and pain. We need maximum cooperation and help with this from you, our faithful members, our pastors, and workers. Wherever there's a culture of silence around these issues, we are encouraging you, our members, and those who fellowship with us, those who worship with us, those who come and visit us, to speak out and report these incidences. Even though the spotlight has been cast on these incidences in the late 60s and 70s, the impact is felt today. We are truly sorry. I have 4 children, including teenage girls and a son. My heart bleeds at the heinousness of these incidences. The victims are at the heart of this saga, and that is why, as a new administration, we endorse the fact-finding investigative process that began in April 2023 that has led to these revelations. We thank you, our faithful members, for your continued love, care, prayers, and support for the victims, even as we do the same. May the love of God bring healing to our hearts. Again, to the victims, we are sorry.